and we're going to talk a little bit more about tooling and
some instruments of software development.
Man, that one wrote itself. I can't believe I didn't think of that.
So yeah, let's talk. I'm going to cover a few areas, just talking about some ways to help avoid some of the smells and anti-patterns that Derek discussed. Starting with some Helix-related tooling, much of which comes from the community. So we now, in the Sitecore family, have the Hedgies, we have Hedgehog, and TDS actually has a lot of great features to help you with Helix implementations, including multi-project builds and content deployment, multi-project packaging, Helix validation rules for items, a pretty unique feature to TDS that allows you to validate the references between your items against Helix practices. And then also Hedgehog had and has a set of open source FX cop rules for Sitecore Helix. And these can be helpful for multi-project or consolidated solution architecture, but if you are doing a consolidated solution architecture, this is highly recommended that you, again, provide that logical boundary for your modules. Going through some other community tools. If you're using Unicorn and you want an alternative to MS Build alternative to Gulp, Richard Zale has created this MS Build extension called the Helix Publishing Pipeline. You can install through NuGet. It's pretty easy to get set up with. And then you can do all your Helix builds through MS Build. It's pretty fast and again, like I said, easy to get started with.
It really is fantastic. I implore you to check it out. It's great work.
We are using it in the new Helix examples as well for the Unicorn-based example. If you're still looking for more of a task runner, but you would rather work in C#, there is a task runner called Cake, C# Make. And Alex Smagen has a set of Cake tasks called cake.sitecore that help you do CI/CD with Helix-based solutions. If you just want a task runner to kind of supplement TDS or HPP to say maybe set up Sitecore and then run your build, you probably already have one installed, and it's called the Sitecore Installation Framework. At SIF, it really is just a PowerShell-based task runner, and it's pretty easy to set up SIF configurations that run PowerShell commands to give you that kind of structured task running. And like I mentioned before, if you are using the Habitat Gulp scripts and the publish all projects is brutally slow, look at the latest and last version of that, which just builds the solution as opposed to all the projects individually. It's much faster. Turning more to the project template and generator side of things, so setting up a Helix project with tests and the web project and serialized items and so on is a bit of a task. If you want to automate that a bit, there are some community tools to help you with that. Anders Laub has his Visual Studio extension that I think is getting increasing use. I used it on the new Helix examples.
Really excellent.
Can get that in the VS Marketplace. If you prefer the command line, I know Pencha and others have Yeoman-based generators, and I know the Pencha one is called Generator Helix on NPM.
It's just fun to type Yo Helix. Too.
Yo Helix.
Yo.
Yo, yo, yo. And then if you're starting a new project and you do want a starter kit, there's a great one in the community out there called Helix Base that has Helix Publishing Pipeline and the other popular modules already installed on it. Or again, Anders' tool has a template for a full solution to get you started with just a greenfield solution.
Again, these aren't the only way to do things.
Yes.
These are great examples and some great tooling.
Yep.
But certainly you don't feel like you need to use Helix Base to be successful with Helix.
Exactly. And this one, if I didn't mention, this is from Neil Shack. So let's switch gears more into patterns, and I'm going to start not with traditional software patterns, but with module identification patterns for Helix. So decisions around what's in a module and whether you should create a module is one of the most difficult aspects of applying Helix. So I'm going to walk through a couple scenarios that will help you in making those decisions. So first off, you have a piece of new functionality, an existing Helix-based solution. Should I create a new feature, or should it go in an existing feature? And the main question you need to ask yourself here is, does it fall in the business domain of an existing feature? And by business domain here, we don't necessarily mean like DDD style domains, but really with Helix, the question is, does it change with something else that's already in the solution? Do these things change together? This could be based on the business structure of your customer. Maybe you're commonly going to get change requirements from customer support together, or from the customer marketing team, or so on. Or maybe it does relate to the information architecture of the site you're building out, but it really is something you need to dive into as a solution architect and evaluate. If the answer is yes, then that it does fall into the domain of an existing module, then that's an obvious place for it. If the answer is no, okay, it's time to create a new module. But maybe you're not sure. Maybe it's a gray area. And I would say, in my opinion, your default should be put it in an existing module, because it's a lot easier later to refactor and split those than it is to refactor and combine them. So, and again, this is where refactoring is not a four-letter word. You should be ready, you should be agile when you're applying Helix, and be ready to refactor later if you find that you're getting a module with too much going on.
Exactly.
Next up, foundation modules. Should I create a foundation module? Well, the first question is, do multiple features depend on this logic or this template or this config file? And if the answer is no, then keep it in the feature. It's just because it's related to, it's a content search configuration doesn't mean you should create a content search module. It's related to that business domain, it should go there. But well, maybe eventually I might have a feature that also needs this. You can refactor that later. Keep it in the feature. Don't create a dependency that you don't need. Don't prematurely optimize.
And again, yeah, exactly. Premature optimization. Yeah.
Next question then is, if you do have multiple features depending on that logic, is the logic non-trivial? If it's a string extension that two modules happen to need, is it worth creating a new module and a new dependency that you have to manage? Sometimes the desire to be dry, to not repeat yourself, can work against you in this case. And maybe it's worth it to actually duplicate that trivial code. So all questions that you need to ask yourself as a solution architect when you're creating when you think you need a new module in Helix. So I'll wrap up here with talking about feature-to-feature communication patterns. I'd say probably the other big area that I feel like people struggle with in Helix and have a lot of questions around. But it's also one of the biggest, and I'd say strictest, practices of Helix, because this is really one of the most important rules in Helix for ensuring stable, non-cyclical dependencies in your solution. And this is what really helps you ease long-term maintenance and avoid buildup of technical debt, and again, provide more long-term value for your customer. So this is really important. I think it's a very important practice not to break or work against. But if you do feel like you need two features to communicate, the first question you should actually ask yourself is, are my module boundaries correct? And Alan Coates in MVP has great content on this that's linked in the resources. So maybe if these things are in the same business domain and if they need to talk, maybe they're in the same business domain and they actually belong in the same module, and we need to refactor them together. But assuming you do have your module boundaries correctly defined, we have two common patterns for features to work together without a hard dependency. And I'd like to follow up the presentation with some real code examples of these in Helix examples, but we'll talk through them for now. And the first is what I would call project layer composition. So assuming our requirement is to have feature-specific meta titles displayed by a metadata feature, we could introduce in that metadata feature a interface that the website, that the project layer module itself can implement. Because it can compose from other modules, it knows about products, it knows about services, it can implement that interface, register it in your dependency injection container, and then the metadata feature can then render the title using content from other modules. This is pretty simple to implement, but it puts a lot of responsibility on the project layer, which is something we typically want to avoid business logic in. It's where we really ideally just be composing functionality. And it would potentially require changing code in the project layer whenever we introduce a new feature module. And that could be a smell for a poor application of common closure, keeping things that change together in the same place. But it could be good if you're not introducing feature modules that require custom metadata often, could also be valuable if you require project or site-specific metadata. Option 2 puts responsibility on each feature to implement the metadata logic. It does this by introducing a new foundation module. So you might call this foundation layer abstraction. So we introduce a new module that's just responsible for obtaining the metadata, not displaying it. And in this case, we use Sitecore pipelines and maybe an interface to do what we call dependency inversion. So Sitecore pipelines are a great way, an easy way of doing this, a great tool you have available for you to do that. So then each feature can implement a pipeline processor and supply its own metadata. So this might be good if you have new features that are commonly going to require their own metadata logic and you don't need project or site-specific metadata. So which do you use? This kind of requires seeing into the future a little bit, right, as a solution architect. And analyzing your customer requirements to really best architect the solution to their future needs. And that's really what Helix is about. It's about helping that future developer more easily make changes and react to customer requirements and provide them more value. And so that's your remit as a solution architect.